Johnny paid his way through college by waitering in a restaurant. "What's the usual tip?" asked a customer. "Well," said Johnny, "this is my first day, but the other guy said that if I got $5 out of you, I'd be doing great." "Is that so?" growled the customer. "In that case, here's $20. "Thanks. I'll put it in my college fund," Johnny said. "By the way, what are you studying?" asked the customer. "Applied psychology?" A family's driving behind a garbage truck when a dildo flies out and thumps against the windshield. Embarrassed and trying to spare her young son's innocence, the mother turns around and says, "Don't worry, dear, that was just an insect." "Wow," the boy replies. "I'm surprised it could get off the ground with a cock like that." A little boy and his father are walking down the street and they see two dogs having sex. The little boy asks his father, "Daddy, what are they doing?" The father says, "Making a puppy." So they walk on and go home. A few days later, the little boy walks in on his parents having sex. The little boy says, "Daddy, what are you doing?" The father replies, "Making a baby." The little boy says, "Can you turn mommy over? I'd rather have a puppy." There were 3 nuns. They all told a priest they were going to do 1 sin each. So the priest says, "Okay, do your sins. Come back and I'll bless you." So they went to do their sins and came back to be blessed. The priest asked the first one, who was laughing, what her sin was. She said, "I had sex with a guy." The priest said, "Okay," blessed her and told her to drink some holy water. So she did. The next one was laughing harder, and the priest asked her what her sin was. She said, "I got in a fight with another nun." So the priest says, "Okay," blessed her and told her to drink some holy water. So she did. The priest asked the last one, who was laughing even harder, what she did. And as she was laughing, she said, "I pissed in the holy water." 4 nuns died and went to heaven. St. Peter was there to greet them at the pearly gates. He looks at the 4 nuns and says, "All right, sisters, I need you to line up and confess a sin to me before I can let you into heaven," as the 4 ladies begin to form a line. St. Peter begins, "No one, what sin has thou committed?" No one says, "St. Peter, I once saw a man's penis." St. Peter responds, "All right, go over to my bowl of holy water and wash your eyes out, and then I can grant your entry into heaven." St. Peter continues, "No 2, what sin has thou committed?" No 2 steps forward and says, "St. Peter, I once touched a man's penis." St. Peter quickly responds, "Oh no, all right, sister, head on over to my bowl of holy water and wash your hands. Then I can grant your entry into heaven." Now, just as St. Peter begins to ask No 3 about her sin, No 4 quickly cuts the line and jumps in front of her. Confused, St. Peter asks, "No 4, why on earth have you just cut in front of your fellow sister? That is not acceptable." "You will have to." And before he can even finish, No 4 blurts out, "Please, Peter, please, you must let me wash out my mouth with that water before she sits in it." Johnny sits at the bar staring at his drink when a large, troublemaking biker steps up next to him, grabs his drink, gulps it down in one swig, and menacingly says, "Well, thank you. What you gonna do about it?" Johnny burst into tears. "Come on, man," the biker says. "I didn't think you'd cry. I can't stand to see a man crying. What's your problem?" "This is the worst day of my life," Johnny says. "I'm a complete failure. I was late to a meeting and my boss fired me. When I went to the parking lot, I found my car had been stolen and I don't have any insurance. I left my wallet in the cab I took home. I found my wife in bed with the postman, and then my dog bit me. So I come to this bar to work up the courage to put an end to it all. I buy a drink, drop a capsule in, and sit here watching the poison dissolve, and then you show up and drink the whole thing. But enough about me. How's your day going?" A lawyer, a rabbi, and a Buddhist monk are driving together on Route 66. It's beginning to get dark, and they are wishing for a place to stop, but there isn't a town for miles. Then they spot an old farmhouse and decide to ask. The farmer meets them at the door and listens to their request. He says that he would be glad to let them stay, but he only has 2 extra beds, so one of them would have to sleep in the barn. The monk says that since his religion values self-sacrifice, he'd sleep in the barn. About 5 minutes later, there was a tap on the door. When their farmer opened the door, there stood the monk. "I can't do it. There's a cow in there. Cows are sacred." With a sigh, the rabbi says that he'll sleep in the barn. 10 minutes later, there's a knock on the door. There stands the rabbi. "There's a pig in the barn. Pigs are unclean." The lawyer says, "This is just insane. I'll sleep in barn. I'll see y'all in the morning." 3 minutes later, there is the sound of heavy running footsteps on the porch, and the door is struck with a booming crash. The hinges tear loose from the frame, the door flies across the room and shatters against the wall. There stands the pig and the cow. A duck walks into a psychiatrist's office. He sits on the couch, and the two stare at each other in silence for a moment. Eventually, the duck says, "Quack!" "Get out of here," yells the psychiatrist. "I won't be ridiculed in my office." The duck travels to another psychiatrist's office. He sits on the couch. The two look at each other in silence for a time. Again, the duck says, "Quack!" "An insult!" shouts the psychiatrist. "I'll have you know I was top of my class. Get out!" The duck travels to a third psychiatrist. He sits on the couch. They stare at each other for a short while. The psychiatrist says, "You hate your father, you worry about money, and you're lonely." "Finally," says the duck, "those other 2 quacks were idiots." This morning, while Johnny's dad was sipping his tea, little Johnny walked up and asked, "Dad, what's between Mum's legs?" Dad raised an eyebrow and said, "That's paradise, son." Johnny nodded, then asked, "So what's between your legs, Dad?" Dad chuckled and replied, "The key to paradise." Johnny looked down for a second, then shook his head slowly and said, "Well, I think the lock's broken, 'cause the neighbor has a spare key." A man gets a peanut stuck firmly in his ear. No matter how hard his wife tries, they cannot get it out. Just as they're about to give up, their daughter arrives home with her boyfriend. When they hear what has happened, the boyfriend tells them confidently that he knows how to get it out. He sticks 2 fingers up the man's nose and tells him to blow as hard as he can. The man does this, and the peanut pops out. Sometime later, the parents are talking, and Mum comments, "Our Vera's got a clever boyfriend there. I wonder what will become of him." "I'll tell you one thing. By the smell of his fingers, he'll be our son-in-law," came the reply. A penguin grows tired of the cold winters in Alaska. So he buys a used Corvette and heads south for warmer weather. About 500 miles into the trip, the Corvette starts to overheat. He stops in a small town and finds a mechanic to get the issue fixed. The mechanic says he is not going to be able to look at the car for an hour, so the penguin asks him if there is any place to eat while he waits. The mechanic says there is a great fish and chips right around the corner. So the penguin leaves and gets a nice lunch. An hour has passed, and he heads back to the repair shop. The mechanic has the car on a lift, so the penguin asks the mechanic if he found the issue. The mechanic says, "It looks like you blew a seal." The penguin wipes the side of his mouth and says, "No, that's just tartar sauce." A man takes his wife to the stock show. They start heading down the alley that had the bulls. They come up to the first bull, and his sign stated, "This bull mated 50 times last year." The wife turns to her husband and says, "He 50 times in a year, you could learn from him." They proceed to the next bull, and his sign stated, "This bull 65 times last year." The wife turns to her husband and says, "This one 65 times last year, that is over 5 times a month. You can learn from this one also." They proceeded to the last bull, and his sign said, "This bull mated 365 times last year." The wife's mouth drops open and says, "Wow, He mated 365 times last year. That is once a day. You could really learn from this one." The man turns to his wife and says, "Go up and see if it was 365 times with the same cow." A man walks into a bar and orders a drink. As he's sitting at the bar enjoying his beverage, a tiny horse walks in and sits down next to him. The man is shocked and asks the bartender, "Is that a little horse?" The bartender nods and the man asks, "What's it doing here?" The bartender replies, "It's a psychology experiment. We're trying to see if a miniature horse can function as a service animal for people with anxiety and depression." The man is intrigued and asks the little horse, "So what do you do for people with anxiety and depression?" The little horse replies, "I tell them, 'Hey, at least you're not a tiny horse.'" A young lad says to his father, "Dad, I've decided to join the army." His dad says, "Well, son, I'm so glad you've decided to do something positive with your life, and as you know, I'm an ex-soldier myself, so I'd like to help you in any way Elle can. You're roughly the same size as Elle was when Elle joined up, and I've still got my old uniform in a case in the loft. Go up and get it from the case and try it on, so you can get an idea of what it feels like to wear a uniform. Oh, and you'll also find a backpack, a water bottle, and my tin helmet too. Bring them all down and try them on." The son comes back down from the loft with the uniform on, looking very pleased with himself. His dad stands there full of nostalgia. "Well, son, you look great," he says. The son says, "Dad, if I'll get the broom, will you teach me some rifle drill?" His dad says, "Listen, son, this is a secret between you and me. I've still got a rifle, but for God's sake, no one must ever know, okay?" "Wow, Dad," says the son. "I'll never breathe a word. Where is it?" His dad says, "Climb back up into the loft, put your hand under the tank, and you'll find it." The son says, "You've got a tank as well." A lawyer Jones is questioning his witness, Smith, during a murder trial. Jones, "Mr. Smith, can you tell us what the deceased said before he died?" Smith, "Yes, I can. He said..." Judge, "Now hold on a minute. I'm not sure if it could be considered hearsay if I allowed Mr. Smith to continue." This led to a long argument between both lawyers and the judge regarding the admissibility of Smith's testimony. After a couple of hours of deliberation, the judge calls for a recess while he consults his legal books. It takes the judge several hours to search through his legal text, so much so that court gets adjourned for the day. Unfortunately, this exchange happened on a Friday, with Monday being a public holiday. On Tuesday, everyone reconvenes in the courtroom, where the judge rules that Smith's testimony will be admissible. Jones proceeds to begin questioning Smith again. Jones, "Mr. Smith, can you tell us what the deceased said before he died?" Smith, "Yes, I can. He said, 'Ugh,' and died. And..." An elderly couple was just settled down for bed when the old man realized he left the lights on in the greenhouse in the backyard. Then they heard voices. 3 men had broken into the greenhouse. Scared, they called the police. The dispatcher replied he would send an officer as soon as one became available, as they were all out on calls. The old man waited for a few minutes, then called dispatch again. He told dispatch, "Don't worry about sending an officer. I shot the robbers, and now the dogs are eating their bodies." In no time at all, police were all over the place and captured the robbers red-handed. One of the cops asked the old man, "I thought you said you shot the robber and your dogs were eating them." The old man replied, "I thought you said..." There weren't any officers available. One afternoon, a little old lady was slowly walking down the street, dragging 2 large plastic garbage bags behind her. One of the bags had a small rip in it, and every so often, a $20 bill would flutter out and land on the sidewalk. A passing police officer noticed the money trail and quickly approached her. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said. "You've got $20 bills falling out of your bag." "Oh dear, really? Thank you for telling me," the old woman replied, looking back at the trail. "I'd better retrace my steps and see if I can find them." The officer, now a bit suspicious, asked, "Mind if I ask where you got all that money?" You didn't happen to steal it, did you?" She chuckled and waved him off. "Oh no, nothing like that. You see, my backyard backs right up to a golf course, and for years I've had a big problem with golfers relieving themselves through a hole in my fence, right into my flower garden." She leaned in and said with a mischievous glint in her eye, "So I came up with a plan. Now, I wait by the fence with a pair of hedge clippers, and when a golfer sticks his you-know-what through the hole, I grab it and say, 'All right, buddy, $20 or it's coming off.'" The cop burst out laughing. "That's honestly brilliant, creative and effective." Then he pointed to the second bag and said, "Okay, I've got to ask, what's in the other bag?" The little old lady grinned slyly. "Not everyone pays." One sunny morning, a blind squirrel was making his way through the forest, tapping along with his tiny stick. Suddenly, bump! He tripped over something long and smooth and landed flat on his face. "Oh goodness, I'm terribly sorry," the squirrel said, brushing off his whiskers. "I didn't see you there. I'm blind, you see." "That's quite all right," came a calm voice. "Funny enough, I'm blind too. We must have just collided." The squirrel chuckled. "Well, this is awkward. Say, do you know what I am? I've never actually seen myself." Let me check," said the other creature. He slithered over and felt the squirrel carefully. "You're furry, got a big bushy tail, tiny paws, and you're always twitching. I'd say you're a squirrel." "Wow, thanks so much," said the squirrel. "Can I return the favor? Maybe I can figure out what you are." "Sure, go for it," said the other creature. The squirrel began feeling all over. You're long, kind of slimy, no arms, no legs, no spine, and oh wow, no backbone at all." He paused, then added, "You're spineless, cold, and definitely full of twists. You must be a government official." A blonde walked into a Manhattan bank and approached the loan officer with confidence. "I'd like to borrow $100 for 1 month," she said. The banker looked at her curiously but proceeded to check her information. After a quick review, he found no credit history on file. "I'm sorry," he said, "but without a credit record, we'll need to charge 20% interest on the loan. That means you'll have to repay $120. We'll also need some collateral." "Collateral?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," he explained. "Something valuable you offer as security in case you don't repay the loan." She thought for a moment and replied, "Well, how about my Ferrari?" The banker nearly fell out of his chair. After checking the paperwork, he confirmed the car was fully owned by her and worth around $140,000. Still in disbelief, he nodded. "That'll do just fine." "So let me get this straight," she said. "I give you the car, you give me $100, and in a month, I pay back $120 and get my Ferrari back?" "Exactly," he confirmed. She handed over the keys, signed the paperwork, and left with her $100. The banker was still shaking his head in amazement as he parked her luxury car in the bank's secure garage. 1 month later, the blonde returned. She handed over $120, thanked the banker, and asked for her keys. Before she could leave, the banker couldn't help himself. "I just have to ask," he said. "Why would someone with a Ferrari worth over $100,000 take out a $100 loan?" She smiled knowingly and replied, "I was going out of town for a month. Tell me, where else in Manhattan could I safely park a Ferrari for 30 days for just $20? A man with 2 buckets of fish was leaving Loch Lomond, well known for its fishing, and was stopped by a game warden. The warden asked the man, "Do you have a license to catch those fish?" The man replied to the game warden, "No, sir. These are my pet fish." "Pet fish?" the warden replied. "Yes, sir. Every night I take these fish down to this beach and let them swim around for about a half hour. When I whistle, they all come back, jump back into my buckets, and I take them home. We do this every night." "That's a bunch of hooey," said the warden. "Fish can't do that." "No, really," says the man. "Here, I'll show you." And he releases the fish in the lock. "Well, I've got to see this," the game warden replied. The man and the warden stood and waited. After several minutes, the game warden turned to the man and said, "Well?" "Well, what?" the man asked. "When are you going to call them back?" the game warden huffs. "Call who back?" the man asked. "The fish." "What fish?" "She's single, she's shapely, she's beautiful, and she lives right across the street. I can see her place from my kitchen window. I watched as she got home from work this evening. I was surprised when she walked across the street, up my driveway, and knocked on the door. I opened the door. She looked at me and said, 'I just got home, and I have this strong urge to have a good time, dance, get drunk, and have sex tonight. Are you doing anything?' I quickly replied, 'Nope, I'm free.' 'Great,' she said. 'Can you watch my dog?' A rabbit walks into a pub and says to the barman, 'Can I have a pint of beer and a ham and cheese toastie?' The barman is amazed, but gives the rabbit a pint of beer and a ham and cheese toastie. The rabbit drinks the beer and eats the toastie. He then leaves. The following night, the rabbit returns and again asks for a pint of beer and a ham and cheese toastie. The barman, now intrigued by the rabbit and the extra drinkers in the pub, because word gets round, gives the rabbit the pint and the toastie. The rabbit consumes them and leaves. The next night, the pub is packed. In walks the rabbit and says, "A pint of beer and a ham and cheese toastie, please, barman." The crowd is hushed as the barman gives the rabbit his pint and toastie, and then burst into applause as the rabbit wolfs them down. The next night, there is standing room only in the pub. Coaches have been laid on for the crowds of patrons attending. The barman is making more money in 1 week than he did all last year. In walks the rabbit and says, "A pint of beer and a ham and cheese toastie, please, barman." The barman says, "I'm sorry, rabbit, old mate, old mucker, but we are right out of them ham and cheese toasties." The rabbit looks aghast. The crowd has quietened to almost a whisper when the barman clears his throat nervously and says, "We do have a very nice cheese and onion toastie." The rabbit looks him in the eye and says, "Are you sure I will like it?" The crowd's bated breath is ear-shatteringly silent. The barman, with a roguish smile, says, "Do you think that I would let down one of my best friends? I know you'll love it." "Okay," says the rabbit. "I'll have a pint of beer and a cheese and onion toastie." The pub erupts with glee as the rabbit quaffs the beer and guzzles the toastie. He then waves to the crowd and leaves. Never to return. 1 year later, in the now impoverished public house, the barman, who has only served 4 drinks tonight, 3 of which were his, calls time. When he is cleaning down the now empty bar, he sees a small white form floating above the bar. The barman says, "Who are you?" To which he is answered, "I am the ghost of the rabbit that used to frequent your public house." The barman says, "I remember you. You made me famous. You would come in every night and have a pint of beer and a ham and cheese toastie. Masses came to see you, and this place was famous." The rabbit says, "Yes, I know." The barman said, "I remember, on your last night we didn't have any ham and cheese toasties. You had a cheese and onion one instead." The rabbit said, "Yes, you promised me that I would love it." The barman said, "You never came back. What happened?" "I died," said the rabbit. "No!" said the barman. "What from?" After a short pause, the rabbit said, "Mixin' me toasties."